Hey, did you guys know that it's No-Mow May? Also, did you know that it's very difficult to say No-Mow May quickly? I challenge you to try it. So some of you may be aware that it is No-Mow May, and Diane, I can see you trying to say it fast right now. This is fantastic. Thank you. Some of you may be aware that it is No-Mow May, and in the process of researching this topic, I actually found some local news that just earlier this month, our Cleveland Heights mayor issued an executive order declaring the city's participation in No-Mow May. So Cleveland Heights is participating in this, and they are, kind of pulling back on the mowing of municipal land to try to promote, plants that are going to support our pollinators. So according to Bee City USA, No-Mow May is a quick and catchy name for a movement that is a gateway to understanding how we share our lawns with many small creatures. So it's one little activity. Actually, it's what we're asking you to do is a lack of activity, but it is it starts a conversation about how we can better support native pollinators, which is part of everything that we've been talking about tonight. So just as a little bit of background, No-Mow May actually started in the United Kingdom, but in the past 5 or 6 years, it has really picked up some steam in the United States, which is really cool to see. So the goal of No-Mow May is we ask people to pause their mowing of their lawn in the early spring. This allows flowers to bloom, and those flowers are then possible or able to feed early season pollinators, whether those are bees or other types of pollinators. I've actually seen a few butterflies in my yard this week, so that's been very exciting. But we want to make sure that those pollinators have a food source. And so we ask people to stop mowing their lawn so that those flowers can grow. Yep, some of them are dandelions, some of them might be weeds, but they are an essential food source for those pollinators early in the season. So then we talk about low mow spring. So No-Mow May might feel like a really, maybe a bit of an intense commitment for a lot of folks, depending on where you live, depending on sort of the norms in your neighborhood. A lot of folks might not feel comfortable letting their entire lawn just kind of do what it wants to do for a whole month. I know that our lawn, my fiance and I have had a lot of conversations in the past couple of weeks where we'll look out on a Friday afternoon and be like, oh man, we got to mow the lawn. It's looking real shaggy. So we've been adopting more of a low mow approach just to make sure that we're not angering any of our nearby neighbors. So low mow spring, this is an approach that acknowledges that not everybody's going to be able to participate in no mow. So it says, okay, well, what if you just kind of pull back on the mowing a little bit? So maybe you don't need to mow every week. Maybe you can mow every 2 weeks, or, maybe even 3 weeks. That less frequent mowing is going to accomplish the same overall goal of increasing the number and variety of pollinators that are in their lawns over time. So if you do this year, you do low mow this year, you'll have some impact, but then also, that's going to create a positive environment for those pollinators. And then next year, you'll probably have more pollinators, and it just kind of accumulates over time. And what's important to call out here is that longer grass, I saw Ray popped in the chat and said, hey, we always want to make sure that regardless of how frequently you're mowing, mow that grass real high, because the longer we allow that grass to get, the deeper those roots can grow. And those roots are also really important because that helps with stormwater resiliency. Because the roots basically break up the soil underneath the turf, and it allows more rainwater or stormwater to saturate into the earth, into the soil, instead of going into our local sewage systems and water processing systems. So we want to try to promote that as well. And I love this sign. I've seen this in a few different places when folks are doing no mow or low mow activity. Pardon the weeds, we're feeding the bees. So I'm hoping to get one of those signs for my yard as well. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting, guys. And I got a little deep on this as I was doing the research, because for me, the question came up, okay, Well, if I do no-mow or low-mow and I'm letting those dandelions grow, well, dandelions aren't native to North America. And in fact, a lot of the plants that are flowering in my yard right now are not native to North America or even Ohio, or certainly not Ohio. So a lot of the flowering plants that are found in lawns are themselves non-native and may not be a great source of nutrients for native pollinators. I found some research demonstrating that dandelions are low in protein and are also known to suppress other flowers and are not really a great food source for native bees. They might be a great food source for bees like bumblebees, but those are not native to North America. So one of the things that you can think about long term as you're thinking about how can your yard better support pollinators is to consider a seed mix that's called a bee lawn seed mix. So these are seed mixes for grasses and turf that are going to be tolerant of foot traffic and mowing while still making space for those pollinators that we want to try to support. Another thing that we want to make sure we remind you to do before you just let your lawn grow as long as it wants to grow, check with your city, check with any homeowners association that you may be a part of. You want to check those ordinances, check those guidelines. This is a great opportunity for you to kind of learn about, what is your community's approach to plants, to, the gardens that we can develop, and what do we want to do to promote native plants, and also can become an opportunity for you to educate local community leaders and your neighbors. But we do just want to make sure that we're checking those rules before we commit to this to make sure that we're not going to get ourselves into any sort of legal trouble. I've got a buddy on the south side of town who makes a point of letting his grass grow as long as he legally can, and he'll get it to like just millimeters under the height limit before the city can give him a ticket. And he just really enjoys agitating the city that way, which is a fascinating, just quirk of one of my friends. The other thing that is also really useful to check out, if you haven't seen this already, Wild Ones actually recently published a blog post about how to deal with the weed police when they come knocking. So we've got the link here. If you go to wildones.org/native plant ordinance, you can learn more about this. And they also have offered a model ordinance that can serve as a starting point for municipalities if you want to work with your local community to introduce an ordinance that is going to incorporate native plant language into the law. There are some examples for how to do that. So then you're being proactive about making sure that your community is promoting native plant gardening while also, having some standards about how we want yards to look, or, making sure that everybody's kind of keeping things in line. So those are also some resources you'll want to check out. Jess, if we could go to the next slide. So I just wanted to summarize a couple key points from that Wild Ones blog post. So how do you deal with the weed police? If you receive a warning or an actual ticket because you have allegedly violated a local law or ordinance, you have the right to ask which law you've broken. And you can totally ask for a written copy of what that violation is and the law that it's based on. When you get that, take a look at it, really read through that. Does the ordinance define what is a weed? If not, or if so, rather, if it defines what a weed is, can you provide information demonstrating that native plants are not weeds? So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and will probably help you to facilitate some conversations with your community leaders and local officials. So it's possible that the official is just visiting you because your neighbors may have called somebody and your neighbors don't know that native plants are not weeds. So this is a great opportunity where you can educate local officials on what's the difference between a native plant that we may just not be familiar with, and what would we consider actually like a problematic plant or a weed. You can also develop some contact and some relationships with local community leaders. When you provide that education, they may just go ahead and dismiss any, warnings or tickets that you may have been issued, clear up those alleged violations. But this can also lead to a new understanding on the part of those community leaders and those local officials of what native plantings can do and what value they bring to our communities. So if you've been in contact with those local officials and educating them doesn't lead to a citation being dismissed, the next step is to kind of, say, okay, what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to need to know when we're going to appear in front of that court or those city officials. So you can prepare for that meeting. You should definitely always prepare for these kinds of meetings. Read your citation, know the local law that's involved. And also you are encouraged to reach out to professionals who may be experts in these kinds of topics. As a side note, another research rabbit hole that I have fallen down recently and that I have personally find very entertaining is tree law. There's a whole field of law and like legal practice focused on trees. And there are lawyers who have built careers just on dealing with trees and like how people negotiate, trees that cross property boundaries or things like that. It's really, really fascinating. So there are definitely experts out there who will be able to help you and provide you with advice and support as you're dealing with these kinds of situations. There's also a wild lawyers team associated with Wild Ones. The fine print here is that wild lawyers cannot represent you, but they can offer suggestions on how to handle this situation and how to resolve that matter in a way that's, acceptable for everyone involved. So if you need help from a wild lawyer, just email support@wildones.org and let them know that you're looking to talk to a wild lawyer about your situation. But overall, we want to look at these, kind of situations or these kind of interactions as opportunities to, use that new model ordinance to educate our communities, update outdated language that might exist in those rules or those guidelines, and just do what we can to continue to promote the use of native plants in our communities. Justin, we got one more slide and we'll wrap it up. Just to bring it back to No-Mow May and the low-mow spring. If No-Mow May doesn't work for you, if that's just not something that's going to be feasible for your situation, there's some additional ideas here that you can take on to promote pollinator health. So these could just include mow less frequently, like we said, that idea of low mow. If no mow doesn't work for you, try low mow. You can adjust your mower height to the highest setting. You don't want to mow more than 1/3 of the grass blade at a time. Like we said earlier, that's going to help the grass to develop deeper roots, which is going to help with that stormwater runoff and is just going to help with the resiliency of your lawn. We also want to stop applying herbicides as much as possible and provide natural nesting sites for bees. So this will require some research because there are lots of different species of bees. And actually about 70% of bees are ground nesting and overall 90% of bees are solitary nesting. So not all bees belong to hives. And so it's going to be really valuable to provide some alternative nesting sites, things like bee hotels. You may have seen those at your local garden store. If you are in a situation where you can't, just convert your entire lawn into native prairie, that's fine. What about turning a small patch of your lawn into a native wildflower garden, or try to incorporate native plants into your existing garden? And then if you are able to, planting native trees actually can be a really great source of food for pollinators. These are going to provide more food for pollinators than any lawn could. Native trees, they're going to beat out those dandelions any day. So lots of options here for how we can promote pollinator health and pollinator, robustness in our communities and in our gardens. But yeah, definitely check out No-Mow May or low-mow spring if those are activities that you can take on as we're trying to promote native plant gardening.
Thanks, Steph. So any questions for Stefanie? Or just something people want to bring up with regards to this topic?
Okay, I have a question. So often we describe a turf as sterile landscape. It's just a monoculture that does nothing for nature. And now, in contradiction to that, No-Mow, Low-Mow scenarios say, well, there is habitat here if we can just allow it. So it seems like there's a possible dissonance between those two concepts.
I will fully acknowledge that that is entirely possible. I do think that, to go back to the quote that we had at the beginning from Bee City, USA, No-Mow, Low-Mow, I think these are really great. I consider them gateway activities to native plant gardening, because that's the kind of thing that is going to get folks more interested in, okay, well, what else can I do? If I can avoid mowing, because I'll be honest with you, my first interest in native plant gardening was not because I was, really dedicated to saving the bees. My interest in native plant gardening is because my fiance and I bought a house and realized how much lawn we have to mow, and thought, how can we reduce the amount of mowing that we have to do? And so that's when we started doing research on native plants, and we've started adding little spots of native plant gardens to our lawn, so that we can eventually get rid of most of our lawn just to save ourselves some time and effort. And I think something like Low-Mow or No-Mow can be a great gateway for someone who maybe hasn't explored native plant gardening before, or hasn't heard about, some of the ways that they can contribute to that. It kind of gets them interested. It gets them hooked, because now they're going to start paying attention to that conversation. So yes, I will definitely agree with you. And I'll fully admit that I have limitations in my own knowledge. So I definitely encourage folks to do some additional reading, do some additional research. But I think this is a great way to just kind of, just get people in the door, get them in the door, and then we can pull them into that conversation about how we can promote pollinator health.
Yeah, I like what you say about gateway, because thinking of your lawn as an ecology, whatever its value may be to that ecology, but thinking of that little postage stamp that it may be as an ecological asset is kind of an entry. And if that, first step is, mow half as many times, or set your mower height up a notch or two. Those are good for many reasons. Even though it may still be a turf grass monocultural wasteland, it's still good to do that for just because it helps the soil. It helps infiltration. For mechanical and physical reasons, it's a good start. And then if you're beginning to think of it as an ecology, and maybe, oh yeah, all right, I'm going to have more violets, I'm going to have more dandelions, I'm going to have at least something where there was nothing.
I love that idea, Ray. That idea of like, hey, something is better than nothing. And, when I've worked with other organizations before on different sort of volunteer topics, the phrase that I always love is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And yes, No-Mow, Low-Mow, it may not always be a perfect solution, but it is something. And that's the kind of thing we want to encourage, is just if everyone could take a little bit of action, that's going to move us closer to the goal that we're trying to achieve.
Great question. Anybody else? My question to the group, since we have a few minutes before we wrap up, is there anybody new on the line that is not necessarily into native gardening yet, and this is a newer concept? Anybody? Let me just check chat. Okay. Oh, I guess not. I guess we have at least people somewhat versed in this. So thank you, Stefanie, so much for sharing your research on these topics.